Alright, so if you're into wrestling, you've probably seen this guy, Danhausen. He's one of the most, well, eccentric and popular comedic wrestlers out there today. An absolute merchandise-moving machine known for his completely bizarre antics. But here's the thing. If you look beyond the catchphrases, our sources dig into a surprisingly complex and honestly pretty unsettling layer to his character. Today we're going to unpack what is a very, very evil comparison.
Very nice, very evil. This is his thing, right? It's his trademarked catchphrase, and it just perfectly captures the paradox that makes him so popular. You have this bizarre, demonic-looking guy who is also just disarmingly polite and goofy. And it's this whole very nice, very evil thing that our analysis is really going to zero in on.
So what even is this character? The performer himself calls him Conan O'Brien possessed by a demon. He's known for these completely absurd moments, like, dancing to tequila in the middle of a match. On the surface, it's all just pure comedy. But our sources argue that there's something much, much darker lurking just underneath all that face paint.
And here's where it gets wild. Our sources present this really provocative idea that Danhausen's whole persona, whether it's on purpose or not, pulls directly from the visual and rhetorical tricks of WW2-era propaganda. I know, it's a shocking comparison, and we're about to break down exactly what they mean by that.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about the character's visual design. The sources argue that to really get this comparison, we first have to understand how propaganda creates a kind of visual shorthand, a quick way to define someone as an other or an outsider.
So the character's whole look? It pulls heavily from early 20th century German expressionism. Think of those ghoulish, shadowy figures in old silent films like Nosferatu. Now, what's really significant here, historically, is that these exact art styles were later labeled degenerate art by the Nazi regime. But, and this is the key thing the sources point out, the regime also took that same ghoulish imagery and used it for its own propaganda.
And this is where the comparison becomes deeply, deeply unsettling. As you can see here, this analysis maps Danhausen's key features, one by one, directly onto specific anti-Semitic propaganda tropes. His ghoulish face paint, it mirrors the vampiric caricatures used to dehumanize Jewish people. His signature hand-rubbing gesture while demanding human monies, that directly echoes those awful, greedy usurer cartoons. The suit, the cape, the curse. Each and every element has a historical parallel that was specifically designed to stoke hatred. It's a visual language of villainy, just repurposed.
So, okay, the visuals line up in this disturbing way, but what about the behavior? This is where that very nice, very evil paradox becomes absolutely crucial. The analysis argues that the nice part isn't just a funny quirk. It's a strategic tool that has its own dark, historical parallels. The sources bring up this term Gleichschaltung, which means coordination. It was a Nazi strategy to make a totalitarian ideology seem, well, palatable. They used a kind of soft sell approach, putting up a facade of nice, orderly programs to mask a truly sinister agenda. And the argument here is that the very nice side of Danhausen's character works in a similar way, using a pleasant outside to hide an evil intent.
And this brings us to what the sources call the infiltrator's playbook. The analysis actually compares Danhausen's methods to the fifth column trope that was huge in World War II propaganda. The idea that the most dangerous enemy isn't some obvious monster, but a polite stranger. He looks the part of the evil outsider, but he acts the complete opposite. His strict no swearing rule makes him seem totally harmless, and this lets him infiltrate systems like human television before he carries out his evil goals of getting money and cursing his opponents.
All right, now we get to the most complex and honestly the most sensitive part of this whole analysis, Danhausen's signature prop. We're about to look at how what seems like a totally absurd comedy bit carries, well, according to our sources, some deeply unsettling echoes of the past.
So in the wrestling ring, this jar of teeth is just a comedic prop, right? He'll pour them into an opponent's mouth to put a curse on them. It's weird, it's goofy, and it's absolutely meant to get a laugh from the crowd. It's just a key part of his strange, supernatural shtick.
And then you read this. This quote describes the intake process at the Hadamar Killing Center, which was one of the facilities used by the Nazi regime. The contrast is just immediate and absolutely stark. This reveals the incredibly traumatic historical context that our sources connect to the systematic collection of teeth. See, this whole process was part of a program called Auction T4. This was the regime's secret mass murder of its own citizens with disabilities. And the sources highlight this horrifying detail. This is where the Nazis perfected the methods of plundering victims' bodies for valuables, and specifically for gold dental fillings. A jar of teeth in this context is not a prop, it's a symbol of industrial-scale dehumanization.
And the sheer scale of this program, it's just staggering. An estimated 200,000 people were murdered. And looking at that number, it really forces you to re-examine the wrestling prop. Whether it was intentional or not, it evokes this very specific, very traumatic history. But the real question is, what is the effect of that?
So after laying out all of these incredibly disturbing parallels, the analysis completely pivots to a crucial counterpoint. How does Danhausen's character, even though he embodies all these tropes, ultimately subvert the very evil he seems to represent? The key, according to the sources, is using ridicule as a weapon.
The primary goal of the historical propaganda we've been looking at was crystal clear. Use caricature to dehumanize its targets, to stir up fear, and to cultivate hatred. The whole point was to make the other seem terrifying. But there was another kind of propaganda during the war. Allied propaganda often used satire and ridicule. You know, Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator made Hitler look like a foolish, tantrum-throwing kid. Disney cartoons mocked the absurdities of the regime. The goal here was completely different. It was to diminish the enemy's power by making them look completely foolish.
And this slide just illustrates the core argument of the subversion perfectly. While Danhausen's visuals might look like Nazi propaganda tropes designed to create fear, his behavior is pure Allied-style satire designed to create laughter. He might look like the monster they told you to be afraid of, but he acts like the complete buffoon they told you to laugh at.
So here's the crucial point. By combining that very evil, ghoulish look with a very nice, goofy, and ultimately harmless personality, the character completely neutralizes the horror of the imagery. The analysis concludes that he takes some of the most hateful symbols of the 20th century and he makes them utterly absurd, stripping them of their original power to make people hate.
And that leaves us with one final and pretty provocative question, doesn't it? This entire analysis hinges on the power of satire, but it really forces us to ask, when we laugh at performers who parody the caricatures of history's monsters, are we actually diminishing the power of those hateful symbols? Or are we, in some way, maybe diminishing our own memory of just how real their evil actually was?